Hi, welcome to Advanced Judaism for Beginners. Here in the channel, we will discuss various Jewish topics, various Jewish religious topics, and we will examine those topics starting from their source, if it's going to be in the 5 books of Moses, other parts of the Torah, or the Talmud, and discuss those topics and examine them in depth as those topics are being discussed throughout Jewish history, throughout Jewish literature, starting in the Talmud, it continues to the different Jewish halachic eras, the Geonim, Rishonim, Achronim. We will discuss all of that. And my name is Ashi, and again, welcome. And with this very quick introduction, we will jump straight to the first topic that we have today. And the first topic is called Lo BaShamayim Hi. Literally translates as not in heaven. Literally, the Torah is not in heaven. And the discussion that we will have is regarding the very process of deriving halakha, deriving the Jewish legal study. Now, the discussion that we will have is whether halakha derives only based on human understanding, in human intellect. Is it only just a human intellectual exercise? Now, of course, when we refer to human, we're saying by the sages, by the rabbis, or can we also rely on miracles, on divine intervention in order to derive halakha? Now, I know this is a bit, sounds maybe big, but here, let's go further on this. In Judaism, for sure in Rabbinic Judaism, is that it's an absolute principle that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai by a divine revelation to Moses. That's an absolute principle in Judaism, that divine revelation. And in fact, the very foundation of Judaism comes from that divine revelation that was given to Moses. In fact, we believe that Moses was the ultimate prophet. Once it was received, thereafter, God gave Moses a certain framework to work with in order to learn to derive, to understand the Torah. So the Torah was given with a set of rules and also with a set of tools, of intellectual tools to understand, derive, and rule halakha, the Jewish legal rulings. So there was a divine revelation at Mount Sinai, but with a set of ruling tools that was given to us. And we're supposed to learn halakha based on those tools that were given to us. And we will see that shortly. We will explain all of this shortly. So the discussion will be, after that ultimate divine revelation at Mount Sinai, can we then rely on more miracles, more divine revelations to rule on halakha? Or do we say that after that, that's it? Now God gave us the Torah with a set of rules, with a set of tools for us, meaning the sages, Chazal, to derive halakha. That will be our discussion. And the very first source that we'll be covering will be from the Talmud, in the tractate Bava Metzia, 59b. Now, there was a certain, just to give the context, the historic context, the Talmud was compiled in the 5th century. And there are being quoted various stories that actually happened sometimes centuries earlier. In this case, it was we will discuss a certain argument in the Talmud that happened among the Tanaim, which they were the 1st and 2nd century Common Era rabbis. And they had an argument. The Talmud brings a story there that there was a certain argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim and his colleagues. And they had a certain argument, which is not relevant per se, the details of that scenario, but they had an argument regarding a certain oven, whether it can receive tuma or not. And again, that's a separate discussion. What was their argument? But for our discussion, it's important to know the following, that Rabbi Eliezer insisted on one ruling, on one opinion, and his colleagues did not accept his opinions. The other rabbis rejected Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. And then Rabbi Eliezer was a very stubborn rabbi. I'm sure some of us know a stubborn rabbi out there. I don't know if it still exists. That still exists. So Rabbi Eliezer, being a stubborn rabbi, tried to bring a bunch of evidence, proof to support his position. And yet the sages rejected all of them, and they ruled against him. So then the Talmud is telling us a fascinating story. Then Rabbi Eliezer said, Then Rabbi Eliezer started to invoke miracles to prove that his position is right. So he started by saying, to prove that I am right, he told his colleagues, this carob tree, charuv, will prove that I am right. My position is right. Then the Talmud recounts and tells us that miraculously the carob tree travels 100 amma, and another opinion held that it traveled 200 amma. Amma is a certain measurement. It's a certain measurement from the Talmud. So he just performed this miracle. Miraculously, a tree was uprooted and traveled. Chachamim, the sages, rejected Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Eliezer miracle and said, you cannot bring a proof from this carob tree. Then he invoked another miracle to prove his position is right. He said, to show that I'm right, this stream of water, this river of water would flow backwards. And indeed, that's what happened miraculously. The sages again rejected, they ignored that miracle and said, you cannot bring that proof. Again, Rabbi Eliezer is stubborn, he's invoking more miracles. If Allah is a kmi, let the walls of the study hall prove my position. So then miraculously, the walls of the study hall where the sages were arguing were about to collapse. Rabbi Yeshua, another Tana, again, a Tana is the rabbis of the 1st and 2nd century. So another Tana stood up and said, Rabbi Yeshua amar lahem, im talmidei chachamim menatzchem ze et ze b'halacha, atem mativchem. Rabbi Yeshua rebuked the walls that were about to collapse, and he told the walls, if the sages are arguing among each other, why the walls are mixing in? Don't mix in. Don't mix in. So what happened? It's interesting. The Talmud is saying, so it says that the walls did not fully collapse in order to honor the Tana Rabbi Yeshua, who rebuked them. They just stopped there in their position. And they did not go back straight in honor of Rabbi Eliezer, who invoked that miracle. And they're still standing there in their midway position, the Talmud is telling us. Kind of, you could think about it like the Pisa Tower, a tower in Italy, that it's still tilting. Now then, Rabbi Eliezer, returning to try to prove his position, then he tries to invoke what seems like the ultimate miracle. And he tells his colleagues, Im halacha kemoisi, min hashamayim yochichu. If halacha is like me, let the heaven prove that I am right. A heavenly voice, a heavenly echo came out and said, halacha is always like Rabbi Eliezer. you, the other sages, what are you guys arguing with him? Allah is always like him. So Rabbi Eliezer invoked heaven, and a heavenly echo came out and said, Allah indeed is like Rabbi Eliezer. Omad Rabbi Yeshua al-Ragav ve'omar, lo b'shamayim hi. However, Rabbi Yeshua, the other Tana, stood up and said, lo b'shamayim hi, we're going to ignore the heavenly echo, that divine intervention, we're going to ignore it, because the words from the Torah itself, the Torah itself says, lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in heaven. And the Talmud will explain, what does that mean the Torah is not in heaven? What does it mean? Mai lo b'shamayim hi? Om Rabbi Yirmiyahu, shekvar nitna Torah me'ar Sinai, ein anu mashgichim bebaskol. Since the Torah was already given to us at Mount Sinai, therefore we're no longer paying attention to any heavenly echoes. Shekvar, and why? Shekvar kotav be'ar Sinai b'Torah acher rabim la'atois. Because that the 5 books of Moses it's already telling us there that there's a rule that sets there that acharei rabim la'atois, we must follow the majority. So meaning, Rabbi Yirmiyahu explains, is that here, when we have an argument of halacha regarding that oven, and we have a minority opinion, Rabbi Eliezer, and a majority opinion, Chachamim, or his colleagues, the other sages, then the rule was already given to us that we must follow the majority. And therefore, that's how we're going to derive here halacha, and we're going to ignore this heavenly echo that Rabbi Eliezer invoked, and we're going to ignore it. Interesting. The Talmud continues in the story, and it says, Ashkeche Rabbi Nosson leEliyahu. It says, Rabbi Nosson met Eliyahu. Now, Elijah the prophet himself came from the era of kings, which is centuries before the Talmud, before the Mishnah. So, but however, Elijah the prophet, keeps reappearing throughout Jewish history in miraculous way. So this Rabbi Nosson, who was a Tana, he met again miraculously, met Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, and he asked Elijah the prophet, when God heard the sages arguing, and when he heard that the sages said that we're ignoring heavenly echo, how did God feel about that? That his children, his sages are ignoring him. What did Hashem do at that time? Elijah the prophet, who knew what was happening in heaven, told him back. He smiled, God smiled, so to speak, and he said, Netzchoni bonai, Netzchoni bonai. My children have overcome me. My children have triumphed over me. So Hashem had nachas had a pride in the fact that his children triumphed over him. So let's summarize the story from this Talmud. We have an halacha argument among the Chachamim in the time of the Talmud, an argument, and one opinion Rabbi Eliezer versus the majority, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Eliezer, to prove his point, was performing miracles. First with a carob tree, then with a stream of water flowing backwards, then with the walls that the other Tana stopped them right there. And then with the ultimate, what's seemingly the ultimate divine intervention, a batkol, a heavenly echo. And yet, we stood up and said, we're ignoring that. Lo b'shamayim hi. And why? Because the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah already, the written Torah is already giving us the rule that we need to follow the majority. Therefore, regarding the oven, we must rule according to the majority. That's a story in the Talmud. So we already see a discussion here in our discussion, as I framed in the beginning of this session, is based on this. The Torah after Mount Sinai, it's simply a human intellectual understanding per the sages' understanding. obviously not everyone can come and not every simple person can come and just learn the Torah and make his own conclusions. But based on the human represented by the sages, the Chazal understanding, that's how we derive halacha. Now, the next source I want to cover with you is Tosfot. So now the Talmud has two principal commentaries. We have Rashi, and again, throughout our learning together, I'll bring more historical background to each one of the commentary. But Rashi, he lived, I believe, about in the 10th century in Europe, in what would be modern-day France today. And he's like from the first generation of Ashkenaz Jews, of the Jews living in that part of Europe. And so Rashi has a commentary on the Talmud. His commentary is strictly, you could say strictly or mainly on the simple understanding of the Talmud. He's not trying to give you an in-depth analysis of the Talmud. Rather, just simple understanding. He's trying to address basic questions the learner of the Talmud would have. So that's Rashi. Again, he lived in the 11th century, I believe, in Europe. Then the other main commentary on the Talmud, we have Baalei HaTosfos. Now, Baalei HaTosfos actually are a group of rabbis. It's not a single one. In fact, there were hundreds of them. And it started with the grandchildren of Rashi, interesting enough. There were three main Baalei HaTosfos that they were grandchildren of Rashi, and it continued that era of the group of rabbis. Baalei HaTosfos lived for about 100 or 150 years. So we're talking about the 11th and 12th century in Europe. They lived in Europe. They were mostly like in the what we would call the Rhineland, meaning on the border between Germany and France, some in Italy, some in England. So they were throughout Western Europe. And what's unique about Baalei HaTosfos is, unlike Rashi, who is just the simple literal understanding of the Talmud, Baalei HaTosfos mainly, what their mission, you could say, is to make the entire Talmud consistent. Meaning, the Talmud, it's a various sets of books, of tractates, which is essentially a collection of various discussion that occurred in the study halls in the yeshivot in Babylon between the 3rd and 5th century. So that's the Talmud, set of those discussions. Those discussions, by the way, could be anywhere about halakha, Jewish law, to Jewish mysticism sometimes, Haggadah you have, storytelling, history you would have there. Whatever discussions were done in those study halls, it was compiled in the Talmud. Now, so the Baalei HaTosfos, their purpose was to make the entire Talmud consistent. And they would always, when you look at the Tosfot, usually most of the times, if you look at their commentaries throughout the Talmud, they will bring another Talmud that is a contradiction to that Talmud. They would try to reconcile between the various Talmuds out there. In our case, our Talmud in Baba Metzia came to seemingly a conclusion by Rabbi Yeshua that says that we ignore heavenly echo. We ignore it. But then the Tosfot brings a different Talmud from Yevamos, that there is a story that Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, two houses of teachings from the time of the temple, they had arguments on a bunch of things. And they kept on arguing. And the Talmud in Yevamos there says that there also a heavenly echo came out and said halacha is like Beit Hillel. And there the Talmud concurs with that heavenly echo, and it says based on that halacha is like Beit Hillel. Then Tosfot asks, how come in our Talmud here we ignore heavenly echo? In Talmud over there, we actually, when it came to the argument between Beit Hillel and Bet Shammai, there we did agree with Beit Hillel. So Tosfot says like this, and I'm going to read this inside, and Tosfot will bring few answers. דשניח שבא לחלוק על דברי תורה, דכסיב אחר רבים להטויס, אבל אוסם אדרבה, בייס הלל רובאי, לא מספק לן, יזלן בשר רובה משום רבי שמאי, אבל yeah. Now like this, he's saying like this to us, what he's saying is that when bat kol, a heavenly echo, comes to contradict the process of halacha, then we ignore it. In our case, in our Talmud, where Chachamim were the majority and the heavenly echo came to contradict that, then we ignore it. But when the heavenly echo agrees with the process of halacha, with the tools of halacha, then we do agree with it. And then we pay attention to it. So, and Tosat says that Beit Hillel were the majority. So therefore, it follows the rule of Acharei Rabim La'atod, that we need to follow the majority. So now Tosat asks, so then why do I need the heavenly echo? Okay, just to tell me that halacha is like Beit Hillel. I could just follow that rule, that I need to follow the majority. Why do I even need it? So Tosot says something interesting, that we needed it. Why? Because Beit Shammai were, he says, sharper. They were smarter. So what happened was, we have Beit Hillel, the majority, Beit Shammai, the minority of rabbis, but yet they were sharper, they were smarter. So you might think that then maybe we don't follow the rule of we should follow the majority. So Tosfos says, no. So Tosfos says that Bat Kol came to tell us that no, even in such scenario, when the minority are smarter, we still follow the majority. ועד כאן לא יצא בס קול, אלא משום כבודו, דרבי אליעזר, שאמר מן השמיים יוכיחו. ועד אותם רבי יהושע, ועד אמר דאמר שלכם, ועד כל השמיים לא. Now he's saying, אלה על בס קול דאי מסר רבי אליעזר, דאחד דייק מדקה, אמר לא בשמיים כבר ניסן תורה מסינן, מה שמע דבשום מקום אין משגיחין. Another reason Tosfot brings is that also another difference between the Talmuds is that in our Talmud, the heavenly echo came only because Rabbi Eliezer invoked that. And out of his honor, indeed, there was a divine intervention to honor him. But there, no one actively invoked it and it didn't come out of anyone's honor, so therefore we do what's it called. There, in Beit Hillel Beit Shammai, we do pay attention to the divine heavenly echo. Now, Tosfot concludes and says, based on that, based on the fact that we have another Talmud that does follow a heavenly echo, therefore, our halacha does not follow our Talmud. When Rabbi Yeshua by us says, Lo BaShamayim Hi, that no, we always ignore heavenly echo, Tosfot says that's not the case. That actually, as per the other Talmud, sometimes we do follow heavenly echo. For example, when it's consistent with halacha, but then we need it to teach us something else. Like for example, there with Beit Hillel Beit Shammai, he needed to teach me that even if the minority are smarter, charife, that's a word of Tosfot, so then we still follow the majority. So even there, we still follow the majority. So Tosfot takeaway is, sometimes we do follow divine intervention. So we'll conclude our study here for today. Again, our discussion in the upcoming videos will be on the very process of deriving halacha. And we brought a story from the Talmud where sages argued. One sage invoked miracles, Rabbi Eliezer invoked miracles. Chachamim rejected all of that. And then Rabbi Eliezer invoked the ultimate divine intervention, that a heavenly voice came out and says that halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. And yet, Chachamim rejected it. Rabbi Yeshua rejected that. And says we do not answer. Why? Because we already have a framework in the 5 books of Moses, in the written Torah. We already have a framework that we need to follow the majority. Acharei Rabim La'atois. And so, therefore, we must follow that framework. Then we brought Tosfot, where Tosfot, again, he tries to make the entire Talmud consistent, and he brings clashes against one Talmud to the other, and contradictions among the Talmud. And Tosfot actually brings another Talmud where there there is also heavenly echo that actually rules that halacha is like Beit Hillel, and there the Talmud does not ignore that, does not say that lo b'shamayim, doesn't reject that heavenly echo. And Tosot explains that it's different because in that Talmud, indeed, that heavenly echo is consistent with halacha. Therefore, we follow it. And also, he says that there we needed that heavenly echo because though Beit Hillel were the majority, Beit Shammai the minority were smarter, at least were sharper. And then I might have thought that maybe I would follow halacha like Beit Shammai. So Bat Kol came out in divine intervention and said, no, we still go with Acharei Rabim La'atois, we follow the majority, and halacha like Beit Hillel. Thank you for joining, and again, we're going to continue in the videos on this discussion. Thank you.